welcome back to the Collin Cadmus Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Sam Nelson. Sam is the founder of SDRleader.com. Prior to starting his own company, he spent almost 6 years at Outreach, where he climbed from their top-performing SDR into management and leadership positions. Needless to say, Sam has been at the forefront of all things sales development over the past decade, so I'm excited to dive in and get his thoughts on what he thinks is working and what isn't for B2B outbound in 2025 and beyond. Before we get started, if you're watching on YouTube, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave us a comment if you have questions or feedback. If you're joining us from Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please drop us a review and let us know what you think of the episode. This is much appreciated. Without further ado, let's dive in and get his thoughts. Sam, thanks for joining me and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really happy to be here chatting with you.
Likewise. It's just I have this huge list of people that I want to meet with, and you've been on it for a long time. It's just another one of those people that I feel like I already know from LinkedIn, but we haven't officially had a face-to-face. So I'm excited to do this, but let's start at the top. Let's dive right in. I mean, I want to go extra deep this time. So for the listeners who've been listening to, I don't know, the past 20 to 40 episodes, I got a few new questions we're going to throw in here, and I worked some of the old ones out. So we're going to dive a bit deeper into, really what we should be doing today on the SDR front. But let's start at the top. I want to get your thoughts here on sort of the broken outbound model. I've kind of changed the way I've asked this question a bunch of times because at first I was being a little presumptive. I was like, what's broken with B2B outbound and how did we get here? Some people don't necessarily even agree with that statement. So I've changed the way that I've asked it. But we've gotten a lot of really consistent answers. So I'm curious to get your take here because you've been in this world for literally a decade straight now. So is traditional outbound sales broken, dead, or dying? If yes, how so?
Well, it's an interesting question. I don't think that there's any question that the way that we do outbound is very insane, in that it's certainly the hardest part of the sales cycle.
Yeah.
It's everyone's bottleneck in the sense that if you can improve outbound, it can basically solve any other problem. And so every other company really needs to improve outbound. Like the CEO, increasing pipeline is going to be one of the top 3 or 5 initiatives for the CEO at every company. And if you're doing really good, that's even more likely to be the case. Yeah. It's this weird evergreen problem that's just always the number one problem. So we've got maybe the most important part of the sales cycle because it can solve any other problem. It's also the hardest. And it's also done by the least experienced people in the company. These are new grads coming in. So there's a question. So I don't think anyone would disagree that the way that we do it is insane. The question is there really a better way to do it? And will that actually work in practice? And I think that's a different question. I mean, a lot of people will say, oh, the problem is we have the least experienced people doing the hardest thing. So let's just simply take more experienced people and do it. The problem is it's very hard to get experienced people to do it. And it's very hard to get experienced people to really go hard at this and not just be willing to work really hard at this role. And so that's kind of the conundrum. Like at Outreach, SDRs were making way more money than the AEs, at least.
Oh, really?
Transition from SDR to an SMB AE, you would make more money as an SDR.
Interesting.
0 people wanted to continue to be an SDR for more money.
Was that because you guys were overpaying to kind of keep them excited, or were they just crushing it?
We were 90 something percent outbound. And so Outreach became, at the time I was there, it was one of the fastest growing companies in America through 90% cold outbound. And so our outbound engine was everything.
So we shut that practiced thing down. What you preached, to the T.
Yeah, and we were also a new way of doing outbound. Outbound was particularly important to Outreach. We're also 90% outbound in the way that we grew. And so that was a really important part of our growth. And so they paid SDRs a lot. The top performing SDRs made a lot of money. But like I said, what was interesting was even for a pay cut, nobody wanted to stay because it's just a hardcore job. And once you've done it for a year, it's just hard to want to stay in.
It's very monotonous. Is that the word you would sort of use to describe it? That's how I've always just kind of summed it up.
Yeah, it can feel that way. It's also just, your relationships with people are about 2 minutes long.
Mm.
You don't really build relationships in that. People like
Yeah.
to say, oh, it's about relationships. Not really. When you're an SDR,
Yeah.
you're basically on the phone for 2 minutes to get them on a meeting with the AE. And so when you're an AE, there's just like having longer term relationships with people, the other things you get to think about. It's just like more stimulating of a job in some ways, in different ways that are important to people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I mean, I started in full cycle sales and we weren't doing email. We were just pounding the phones, 200 calls a day or 100 calls a day, depending on how many, meetings we were also running. But it was very similar, right? It was, we were the big challenge we had there. And I hired, we had just gotten acquired the year before I had started there at single platform. So everything was growing fast. We had all this opportunity to move up and stuff. So I got to move into training and hiring the new people. And we hired like 100 some odd people in less than a year. And so everything just moved so quickly. And the problem that we had, I mean, we were great at hiring people, great at training people, great at getting them, to be successful within 30 days of, post, a couple weeks in the classroom. But 6 to 9 months in, people were like, this is so boring. Like we're doing the same thing over and over and over like a robot. And, if it wasn't for making the office fun and the culture fun and just being a part of the team so much fun, it would have been the most boring job on planet Earth. But we managed to bring enough fun around it. But still, always the struggle was like, how do we keep people in the role for longer? And never really found a solution to that. Like by the time I was at Aircall working with Brian L. Sesser, who I think we were preaching for a while. We need to make the SDR role a much higher OTE. We need to make it a longer career path. And we just sort of thought that if the money was there, people would stick around. But even as we experimented with that, it was still really the same thing. People want to learn, and once they kind of feel like they figured something out, they're just ready for the next challenge, right?
Yeah.
Did you ever find anything that worked to sort of extend that tenure, or is it you think this is just the way it is, and you got to move people up and that just keep that train going, so to speak?
No.
Yeah.
Didn't find anything. There are companies that do that though. I've noticed one pattern with companies that keep SDRs for longer is it's a little bit lower pressure of an environment, which is one way to do it too, right? Right. They'll
Yeah.
have like lower standards, but if you're going to have like high standards, like 12 qualified meetings of pure outbound a month, which you can do if people are kind of working like really, really, really hard. It's really hard to keep people in that role for longer.
Yeah.
The better kind of way to look at it, I found, is like just having a really good career path for them. Because the other thing that we learned was, hey, when people could come from no experience to being an SDR for 1 year, and then become an AE, and then outperform people that had 10 years of experience as an AE. And
Yeah.
so in that way, it was a pretty efficient position because in many cases, like their OTE is like a new AE was like half of some rock star from a huge
Yeah.
company, and yet would outperform them. And so kind of really getting that portion of kind of our career path figured out made it really efficient, and it can work in that way too.
Yeah, so that's basically what we landed on too. It was like, let's put together a career path, and a lot of that was like, we used to have I forget what we called it. We called it like an epidemic of like coffee with the manager, so to speak. And when they promoted me at single platform, like we just had like a VP sales and one sales manager with like 150 people, and I was like begging to get promoted. I'm like, you guys need help, man. Like you can't keep doing this. And finally, they gave me that chance. And well, the first thing I did was like put in a career program, because we noticed that like once people got like 2 or 3 months into the role, they wanted to take the manager out for coffee to like talk about their career and figure out what they needed to do. And it was a huge waste of time. So we're like, why don't we just make this standardized and like let everyone know right out of the gate what you need to do to get to the next level and stuff. And that definitely helped.
Did you say 2 to 3 months into the role they want the coffee chat with the manager about the next thing?
Sometimes sooner. It usually was like once they got the hang of it, they're already thinking about like, well, wait, what's next, right? Because I don't want to do this forever. They've pretty much figured that out pretty quickly, that they don't want to do it for too long. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and also just knowing what this is leading to, I think is really important, a piece of motivation as well. If you don't
Yeah.
see the light at the end of the tunnel, it can be hard to stay motivated. And so I think that's important, even if you know you're going to be in it for a year.
Yeah.
The other timeline that you mentioned was like 6 to 9 months. They're like, dude, I've gotten everything
They're burnt out at that point,
They're
right?
kind of burned out.
Yeah.
Like we would call that the 7 month itch, where it's like, hey, like it's not novel anymore, but it feels like you can't see a light at the end of the tunnel. And I would really try to prepare SDRs for that time. Like at 7 months, you are going to just, it's a hard time and a lot of people want to quit.
Yeah.
If people get to that point and they quit and go start some other SDR job for someone who tells them they're going to, trust me, bro, you're going to be an AE really quick here. You just have to start from scratch again. You end up in the cycle where you're just cycling between SDR roles for every 7 months. It is much easier to transition to an AE at a company where you have already been an SDR for 7 months. And so getting ahead of that and saying, look, this is going to happen. You're going to feel like it's hopeless. You're going to feel like you're going to want to leave. You're going to have happy ears for someone who makes promises that aren't realistic. You just need to realize, like, this is the place for you. If you want to be an AE, we have a path here. So as an SDR leader, if you can have that situation, that's ideal.
Completely agree. Same. It's so much of just the same experiences and conversations that we've had. Yeah. Completely with you. And, what was I going to say? We used to, I wanted to just touch on the point you made about the cost piece, right? This was a big sort of, and I don't want to say debate, but it was always a topic that would get brought up every time I came in as a VP of sales or whatever. Like, are we going to hire more experienced AEs? Like, let's bring in some experience. Once in a while, we would do that if we really felt that they could add something to the team. But yeah, I always largely preferred training from entry level. I mean, not only is it easier for us to just sort of mold them and train them, assuming we have the time to do it, but the cost was drastically different, right? You would sort of self-groom like your top AEs from an SDR, and they cost a fraction of what it costs to bring someone in who's got that 2 or 3 or 5 years experience. And they're often just better, right? Because they're just pumped up, they're motivated, they're super excited and grateful for the role. So totally with you there, 100%. We're perfectly aligned so far, but let's jump into this. I think this is going to be, I'm curious to get your thoughts here. What's actually working today, right? So, I mean, we can go down the list of things that people say are broken, dead, or dying, which is, it's semantics, but I think we can, tell me if you disagree, but we can agree everything's getting harder, right? The noises, there's more volume, connect rates are going down. What are you seeing that's working? What do people absolutely need to be doing? Wherever you want to go on that.
Well, I would say it's going to be 80% the phone. And I would make an argument that it's kind of always been that way. Really, SDR teams that say, hey, we're an email-only team. We're really successful with email and we don't really need to call. Generally, most of the time, they're kind of laundering inbound leads through email. Like very few pure, true outbound teams are really successful through only email. And I think it's been that way for a long time. With AI, this is particularly true. And I think people who aren't in the trenches are a little bit confused by this for whatever reason. Like whenever I post content about emails, it just goes hyper viral. People really like to talk about it for some reason. I think some people get the impression that that's what makes an SDR successful or not. I'm not sure why that gets so much airtime. But even before AI, successful pure outbound teams that are actually outbound are converting 80% over the phone. And I think now, whether you believe that or not in the past, with AI, like the marginal difference of a human written email compared to one assisted by AI is just not that different. Again, I'm not sure that human written emails really were a huge ROI for time spent in the past, but I think now it's pretty clear to a lot of people that that's not going to move the needle as much as it used to. And I don't think it moved the needle much in the past. So one thing, I think there's a consensus among SDR leaders that it really is the phone more than ever. Phone's working just as well as it always has. And if you're going to have a successful outbound team, it's going to be with the phone.
Completely agree. And it's the one thing that, AI can't do. I mean, just from a legal standpoint. And so we've got sort of that protection there, which is like, if you can be great at pounding the phones, you've got some job security, right? You're not going to get replaced by the AI SDR or whatnot. Just while we're on that topic, I'm curious, do you have favorite tools for like finding the best phone numbers and the contact info, or do you kind of think that they're all sort of the same?
I wouldn't say that they're all sort of the same. I think data is a constant complaint among my community. And by the way, like I run a community of 4,000 or 5,000 full-time SDR leaders, and I have dinner with, with hundreds and hundreds of them a year. And so I kind of get to hear word on the street. There's always
Hmm.
complaints about data. I don't know if that will
Yeah.
ever change. Everyone's going to want
I
better
don't
data.
think it'll change. Yeah. It seems
Um,
to rotate, which is the favorite tool of the year. Zoom Info was kind of crushing it. They acquired Discover.org, back in sort of my VP sales day, like that was sort of top, top picking. But now it seems like there's some other tools kicking around, and I get mixed feedback, but I'm always curious to ask.
yeah, I mean, I'd say Zoom Info kind of owns the market.
Yeah.
It's actually really impressive that they were able to get so much market share in
Seems like
something.
that Discover org merger made that come to life, right?
Yeah.
But they maybe just sort of hung on to all that loyalty, and they've got some creative ways of collecting data too, with the email signatures and the stuff that they do, right, to sort of capture data. I think if they're still doing that with their freemium model, I think they might have been the only one, at least that I knew of, that sort of had a strategy like that for like, hey, we're going to give you this product for free. I don't know if you know, people, they put something weird in the email signature and it sort of grabs all the info out of your emails, and so they've got some creative ways to do that, but yeah, it was always a debate at our teams. Everything we would like test out a bunch of tools, take some free trials, and then I would bring the team in a room like, hey, which ones do we like best? It was a huge debate, and it's like no one agrees here. So I'm like, all right, which one are we going with? Like, all right, and we would just take a vote, and I'm like, that's it. Like, we're spending too much time on this, and so let's just take our pick.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
mean, there are tons of data providers. I'd say there's a lot more, there's a lot of innovation going on in our space. A lot of it around the prioritization of who to reach out to.
Hmm.
A lot of it around signals and things like that. So data, there's a lot of companies fighting for that as well. But there's a lot of VC money going into prioritization in particular.
Yeah. Yeah. Any thoughts on what's going on with some of these companies that are getting like banned off of LinkedIn and stuff? I mean, Seamless and Apollo, I haven't checked recently, but I was kind of mind blown that they just like wiped them off the face of the earth there on LinkedIn. I've never seen them do something like that, but it seems like maybe there's LinkedIn's looking to get into that game, I'm thinking, and they're sort of kind of cleaning the competition field, so to speak. That's my
Yeah,
guess, right?
yeah. I don't know enough about the dirty details, but yeah, it is a crazy thing, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what are you thinking about AI? I mean, I'm trying to stay on top of this and understand what's going on. Are we actually going to just start replacing SDRs? Are we going to replace half of what they do? And there's a lot of emotion on the topic for good reason, right? Anytime we talk about taking people's jobs, I mean, people are gonna, you're gonna have sort of an intuition of how you want to respond to that. And I've been trying to just get to the truth, like what's really coming down the line, and you'll see people who I trust wildly and I respect them. And you'll just see one person like Lemkin's all in on the AI lately, right? Everything he's tweeting is like AI is coming for you. And I think where he's coming from that is like salespeople, like the ones who get defensive, we're usually like good salespeople. And we're like, well, an AI can't do it as good as I can. But where he's coming from is probably looking at like, well, the average salesperson's really maybe not that great, right? And they're kind of really expensive and they're kind of a pain in the neck to employ. And so I think there's kind of these two schools of thought there. One is like, let's get defensive and talk about all the things we can do that AI can't do. But the other is really coming from the founders and investors, I would say, and maybe even some of the leadership is like, this is really expensive. This is really time consuming. This is really costly. And like at the end of the day, are the results really that good, especially if we know they're going down just organically anyway? What do you think's going on there? I mean, I partnered with the guys at AI SDR just to kind of stay close and get a sense of what's happening. And what I learned, I'll give you my thought real quick, and then I want to hear from you. But is it seems like they're not really replacing the human. I mean, it's kind of semantics. Like maybe you'll need less SDRs because we're using some automation, and so you can maybe claim that it replaced some people, but then the SDRs you have, maybe they can now focus 100% on the phones, right? And to your point, like if 80% or whatever of our outreach is coming from the phones, like that seems like a good thing to me. But what do you think's happening there?
It's interesting. Well, it's hard to model out how things are going to change. It's because it's not like everything's staying the same and then AI is changing, some parts of what we do in sales development. There are all these other things that are changing at the same time that will kind of play into that, and it'll play out with just like a whole bunch of different things happening at once. So it's a little bit hard to model, but I'll say like some things that I've noticed are the full kind of using AI to replace the SDR completely. At least right now, no one seems to be using that. At least in the mid-market and above. Because like I said, I sit down to dinner with 30 or 40 SDRs 40 times a year. And the full cycle SDRs doesn't even come up. If that had come into a mid-market company and replaced their SDR team, everyone would be talking about it, everyone would hear about it. It's one of the most evaluated things by leaders, but hardly any mid-market company has adopted it. And so I'm honestly just a little bit confused by that because there's a lot of hype around it. They seem to have traction, and yet no one that I talk to is using it. Yeah. And so I wonder if I'm not quite sure. Part of me wonders if this is something where people are using it for really small companies, before they have an SDR team, and this is replacing, one of the hundreds of outsourced SDR shops. Those are extremely ineffective as a whole, those outsourced SDR shops, and very expensive. So maybe this is something that costs a tenth as much, that is, has comparable results to an outsourced SDR team. Because there is one huge gap in the market where you're a new company, you desperately need pipeline, but you don't have enough money to have a manager and 7 reps doing outbound. And so there's this weird in-between stage. So I wonder if they're filling that. But the weird thing is no mid-market companies seem to be using it. Yeah. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there. The other piece of it is one thing that AI is very good at is it's very good at prioritizing who in an individual company is the right person to reach out to. It's good at prioritizing accounts and things like that. And that is a major problem in outbound. You have these new grads that aren't prioritizing well and wasting the vast majority of their time. And so I think in the short term, a lot of these companies that are helping prioritize leads are going to make a huge difference for just having them do the same work aligned to the right people. You can get about probably a 2x lift just by doing that, because no team is doing that effectively right now, and AI can easily solve it. And so I think that in the short term is going to make a really big difference, because some leads are 100, some leads are 1,000 times more effective than others. And previously that just wasn't done effectively. And so I think that's where we're going to get the biggest unlock. Meetings are being set over the phone, which AI isn't really good at doing right now and not really allowed to do. And I'm not sure anyone's really motivated to.
I think you'd have to opt in. I'm pretty sure that's still the case in every state in the US, that you would have to actually opt in to allowing that. So it's basically no bueno. You can't do it really.
Yeah. And I mean, there's always the chance that everyone just decides to break that law. Everyone just breaks canned spam.
In that case, it would have to be small companies though, because there's just too much to lose. They'll get fined, and you'll be. I mean, I think it was, who was it that got fined a ton of money back in the day? I think it was Amazon or something for automating calls or something. And there was a big multi-million-dollar fine that I remember was always sort of the fear of so they do actually crack down once in a while on that stuff. But yeah, I think it definitely depends who you ask today. If you ask the guys at AI SDR, that actual company, they've been very conservative with stuff. What they noticed right out of the gate is getting demand and pipeline for themselves is not the problem. They have everyone begging to try this stuff because everyone's looking for magical pipeline, right? So that's a unique situation for them to be in, is it's effortless for them to find pipeline. The hard part is finding people that it's actually going to work for today, because they're very early and they're trying to figure it out, and they're being really cautious about trying to actually work with people that it's working for. But I think there's some other companies that have taken a different approach. They're just let's sign everyone up and let's just kind of break things and see what happens. And that's where I see more negative feedback coming in of it doesn't work and all this stuff, because they're just promising the end solution of what they're hoping to someday have built, but it's not quite there yet today. Yeah, and I've seen actually, so there are small companies that are using them, to your point, like they just don't have the budget. But interestingly enough, I dove into one of their case studies last week, and actually, it was a huge company acquired by IBM. But it's not like they're using it for their full, like every piece of outbound. It's like they have very nuanced areas where they're like, hey, we're doing a lot of manual emailing here. It's sort of the same thing over and over. Like we can automate that, right? And so I think we're going to see weird things like, like tire shops, or you call to refill your contacts or your prescriptions, and there's just a lot of automations. Like it's weird use cases like that today that are so different from what we do that we don't even kind of think about them. But seems like that's where they're kind of sinking their teeth into today, are these just kind of unique use cases. Lots of inbound stuff when you have like high volume, like people calling in for something, or emailing in and they want to automate stuff. So it's weird use cases today. I think we're a ways away before it's sort of like, something that can be used more generically. And it may never be, right? It may never be like, it's not going to be like the outreach where every company can just sign up for it and benefit from it. I think you have to have a specific use case there.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I'll say inbound's a different thing. Like speed to lead is more important
Oh
than
yeah.
customization and things like
That's, I
that.
think,
I
the low
think,
hanging fruit for AI
yeah,
today.
that's what I think.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
agree.
totally with you. All right, here's a big question. This is a new one that I'm throwing in here, and it's kind of all over the place, right? Because everyone's asking about this, and it took me a while to realize just how important this was, because I used to kind of just think earlier in my career that like if you're working for a venture-backed company and they have money, like they're going to probably be a great employer as long as you kind of like the CEO and the culture's good and all that stuff. But I mean, I've come a long way into realizing that like there's one thing that ultimately matters, and it's, do people actually want what you're selling? Is the product good? And like you start to just look at the average 10 years and all that stuff. And it's just, I mean, I've talked to Andy, Mark, and Manny, and now you, and like outreach, it defies the odds when it comes to average tenure or quota attainment or all these sort of horrific, industry averages. And it's sort of the same story when you look at like Gong or like another company that's just totally crushed it. And so I've come to realize like really the thing people need to be focused on, I think, is finding these great products. And that's easier said than done. You've actually done it. So I want to get your thoughts. Like, how do people choose the right employer? Maybe if you want to talk about how you chose outreach, or was it just luck of the draw? Did you have some sort of magical way of identifying, the product? Did you test it? Did you talk to people? Or what advice do you give? Like if someone's just looking for that job today and they've got all these companies that are venture backed, they all kind of look good on the surface. Like, how do you tell the difference between something that's actually good versus junk?
Yeah, that's a good question. And well, I'll tell you the reason that I chose outreach was because I had come off of, I started a company, like a really a mission driven company in college that didn't work out, didn't become $1 billion company like I planned. But I learned in that experience that the most important skill that I can learn is pipeline generation if I ever wanted to start a company again. And so I just wanted to find a job where I could learn how to generate pipeline. And then when I heard of outreach, it was like, whoa, not only would I learn to generate pipeline, but it would be a tool that wants to change the way that people generate pipeline, selling to people who generate pipeline. So it was like really meta. And that's why I chose that company. And that's
So you
why I
went there
chose
to
that
learn.
discipline. I was there to learn outbound. It
Yeah.
was clear that's the most important skill, certainly for
Right.
entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And so that's why I chose that. Since I've been in it, there are some patterns that I've noticed. Like if you are going to stand up an SDR team at a company, it is high risk and high reward. You should know that most of the time it's not going to work out. But I also know people who have done that multiple times and have been successful every time. But it's risky. Often the founder doesn't know much about outbound or know what it takes or know what success looks like. And so just most of the time, it's not going to work out and you're going to get let go 6 months later. So
You talking about
that's wide open.
being part of the first SDR group? Is that what you meant? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. If they already have an established SDR team, the risk goes down significantly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the most fun stage to join a company is kind of late Series A or a fresh round of B funding, because at that point they have plenty of money to make it work. They raise that money because they are there to generate pipeline. You're going to be very well supported. They've worked out a lot of the kinks. You have rational, mature leadership who are making decisions. And Series B is a really fun time, and then any time after that is good too. You can start to the further you go after Series B, the more you might feel like a little bit of a cog in a machine.
Yeah.
Series
Yeah.
B is a sweet spot where it's like you got lots of funding. They're still figuring some things out, and so it's kind of fun. It still feels like the Wild West a little bit, but with a lot of security. And so that's where I kind of see the sweet spot. But every stage has its pros and cons. If you like a lot of security, a little bit later, or a public company is going to be great for you. If you really want to roll the dice and you really believe in a company, seed and Series A can be good too. But it just depends on what you're looking for a little bit. They all have different advantages.
Do you think do you think that people should kind of try to pick a category or an industry and stick with it? Like if they let's say that there maybe there's always a level of hesitation. You don't really know until you're there, and so should there be like an overarching category like, hey, I want to sell to other SaaS companies, or I want to sell marketing tech or fintech, and then if it doesn't work here, I'm gonna kind of go somewhere similar. Do you think that's important, or doesn't really matter?
Okay, well, I would actually say that I would break it into basically two different categories. I would say there are companies that sell technical products to engineers or IT or things like that,
Hmm.
where an understanding of the technical part is extremely important. At those companies, they often pay well. It's definitely not a sales culture, so it may feel a little bit less fun from a sales culture perspective.
Yeah.
It's also with those technical products, making the jump from SDR to AE is harder, because your understanding of the underlying technical things is really important to the success of the AE.
Yeah.
So for that one, those are just some things that you should know. Outside of that, the skills that you learn is if you're a successful SDR at a sales or marketing tech company or HR or anything that doesn't require that, if you're a top outbound SDR, you are very likely to be a top AE, because it is your skill set as a salesperson that is going to determine your success. And so I think about it in those two different buckets. Technical has some nuances where you really have to understand the technical parts to be successful as an AE. Where that's not the case, you can pretty much go into different categories there.
Mhm.
And if you're a successful SDR, you're going to be successful. Um, I am, I personally really like to stay in sales tech. I know a lot about it, and that your network and your understanding of a category can compound over time. And I know
Yeah.
some people in cybersecurity or in other areas have found that to be successful as well. Sometimes people just get bored of being in the same spot,
Yeah.
or they just want to learn something new. The trade-off is you have to reboot your network and your understanding and things like that. So those are the
Yeah.
trade-offs there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've always sort of looked at it from the sense of like what you're selling, right? Like if you're good at selling finance products, like maybe you want to try to go to another, company that's selling something similar. But I hadn't really thought about it through the lens of like who you're selling to, right? The profile of who you're selling to, and that's arguably more important. So that's a great point. What do you think are, yeah, this is a good one here. What do you think are the biggest mistakes SDRs or SDR leaders are making today?
Well, the biggest mistake that is made on teams is there's not a good process for reaching out to the right people. And when I first left Outreach, I spent a couple of years at Outreach and then a couple of years after doing consulting. And so
Mhm.
I got to look under the hood at a lot of different companies. And I would say the vast majority, almost all, had a bad process for SDR selecting the right people to reach out to. There's a lot of focus on how to do emails. There's some focus on cold calling.
Yeah.
Very little, if any, training on who within a company is important to reach out to. And it's a huge oversight because some people are 100 or 1,000 times more likely to turn into an opportunity within a given company. And I actually think a lot about why this is such a huge problem and why no one talks about it. I think it's just like it goes unnoticed. When someone does poorly, you assume that it's their phone calling or their emailing or something. You just kind of do that. And it seems like everyone's missing the underlying problem is you're just not reaching out to the right people. And so the biggest problem is that. And what I would say for any team, listening is to do an audit of who, like if you look at your worst performing SDR, see who is in the time consuming sequences, right? Because some sequences will take, 10 minutes to execute. Some will take 10 seconds if they're only email. Look at the people they are allocating a lot of their time toward, and you'll find that most of them are non-starters, usually. And so the biggest problem is one that no one seems to be talking about, and that is that SDRs are just not reaching out to the right people. Their new grads are terrible at figuring that out. There's no process for it.
Yeah.
And so everyone's spinning their wheels on the wrong people. And so across the industry, that's the biggest problem.
How do you refine that? Maybe let's double click on that a little bit. Like, I mean, just from a high level, there's top down approaches, there's bottom up. I mean, do you start by sort of building out the ICP and then kind of back into like, how do you get to, that person, that decision maker? And is it a trial and error game? Are you experimenting to see what works? Or if you go into a new org as a consultant or leader, are you just running reports and like, hey, let's look at the top reps, let's look for patterns, and how do you kind of approach that?
What I would do when I was consulting is I'd get the head of marketing and the head of sales and head of SDR in the same room, and I would say which departments are leading to the opportunities that close, which specific ones. Like for outreach, okay, it's sales. Is it sales ops? Is it the SDR leader? Is it the AE leader? Is it partnerships? Whatever it is, and get really granular. Like for example, at outreach, the vast majority of our deals were actually started with the SDR leader. And so we'd say, okay, our very most important department is the SDR leader. What are the specific titles that we will run into? Down to like, is it sales director or director of sales? Or is it director comma sales? Because the percentage chance that they're actually managing managers is very different depending on the nuances of the title. And so we would get all the titles laid out that they will possibly run into and then stack rank them by the odds that they are actually either a manager or managing managers. We stack rank those, and then we draw the line and say, okay, these are people who are likely to become an opportunity. And usually the line is drawn at manager plus. Some people it's a little higher, some people it's lower. But usually it's manager plus, and if you just simply allocate your resources to those, and not people who are inflating their titles who are ICs, that alone will make a huge difference. And so, and this is I gave you an example. Sales is an easy example because a lot of salespeople are listening to this, and they can say, "Oh yeah, we know a sales director might sound like a director to someone who's new." But we all know that's a rep.
Yeah.
So, but that little mistake from someone who's new can totally ruin any chance of success, no matter how skilled they are at the job.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes perfect sense. I'm going to throw a little extra one in here. How did you guys think about, or how do you think about in general, the territory assignment? This is one that I've sort of gone back and forth on, in my head. I mean, the one thing I've always avoided and have never done is assign territories based on location. Now, I know there's probably scenarios where that makes sense and where it's needed. I've always tried to avoid it. And the main reason is that, I think it's hard to manage. It's harder to scale. You have to kind of keep breaking things down as you hire more people. I always just found it to be easier to put all of the data into the CRM and just assign things out to people in more of a fair or equal sort of distributed way. I also wanted my reps to have leads in each time zone. So like throughout the day, they can kind of rotate based on the time of day and all that stuff. And I just didn't want to ever end up in a scenario where there were clearly just people who had better leads than others. And I've always felt that when you do it based on like a regional sort of or city-based or whatever territory that you land in that, how do you think about that? Do you have kind of one way that you always do it, or does it depend?
Yeah, for location, the cons outweigh the pros. I would agree with you on that. I mean, back when there were like, traveling salespeople, you can save $50 on a flight.
Sure. It made sense. When I had outside salespeople, yeah, you had to. We had our New York guys and whatever. Yeah, yeah.
But even that, but that's not really that material part of the job, even for a SaaS rep these days, certainly not for an SDR. So aligned to locations is not really that common unless you're just trying to align by time zones for simplicity. So
Right.
the most common structures, you just assign out accounts, and you can swap those really easily. From an operational perspective, SDRs churn out all the time. And so like
Yeah.
if you like have an area that's missing someone, you got to ramp someone, it's a mess. So like the most common way and the most effective way to do it is really just to give them a list of accounts. You organize them the best you can, you distribute them the best you can, and then when someone leaves, you kind of reallocate those. And then you also diversify who the AE is receiving leads from. There's not some huge gap if they leave. Yeah. And so it's really, you just like assign out accounts and you just kind of swap them out. With the average tenure of an SDR, it's the only way to do that operationally that doesn't cause huge problems.
We're
It's
totally
not
aligned
perfect by any means.
For some reason, I thought that you guys did location-based territories, but
I mean, we
no.
tried it.
Okay,
We tried
okay,
it, but then but we ran into the same problems that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tried to, and I had one sales ops guy in my early days who was really good at this. But always tried to automate that stuff as much as possible. And so we would sort of architect into Salesforce different lead assignment rules. And some of them were really helpful because we would put things in place like, hey, if you don't touch this lead for like X amount of days, it's going to drop out of your name and go sit in this pool. And we would call this pool, like, I forget what we called it, but the point was it was to like cool off leads. And so either things would go into that pool if we were just hitting them too many times and we got no response, we would let them cool off. Or if someone wasn't following up enough, it would go sit in that pool and then things would get redistributed out to other reps. And so you might come in today and have a lead pop up in your list and you can see that like your coworker over there was trying to get in touch with them a couple months ago. And 6 months before that, someone else was trying to. And we started to realize that maybe this was just luck of the draw with timing. But I think, my theory, I think, was that some people just resonate better with other prospects. And so actually just rotating them around, like maybe this prospect just wasn't going to answer for this one person. And all of a sudden a different personality type, sort of reaches out with a slightly different tone or whatever. And so we would also just rotate them for that reason as well.
Yeah. And a part of that too is just when you've been hitting the same list for a long time, you kind of have in your head, like, this is a lost cause, and fresh eyes often have more faith. And I've seen that happen too, right? Where the same patch of grass from a good SDR can go to a new SDR and they'll get meetings that the other one kind of had lost faith in. And so I can see that.
Bingo. Well, we got a few minutes here, so I'm gonna throw in one more sort of bonus question before we jump to the end. How have you thought about the difference between inbound and outbound SDRs? Do you think it's important to have just completely, at a certain point of scales, completely separate reps? Do you try to send inbounds just straight to an AE? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, so when I think of SDR leader, I pretty much think about kind of outbound. I think inbound and outbound are almost different disciplines. Inbound, I mean, the compensation per lead is like a tenth or less. Speed to lead is everything.
Yeah.
The customization, a lot of the things that makes an outbound rep successful will not make an inbound rep successful, and vice versa. And so I really kind of believe you treat those as separate disciplines. And transitioning, like any company that tries to have people start with inbounds and go to outbound struggles. I'm a believer in keeping them separate disciplines. And when I think of sales development, I really think of kind of the outbound component as being kind of the heart of what our pipeline generation is.
Yeah. We kept it separate at AirCall. When I started there, inbounds were just going straight to AEs. And I realized pretty quickly, I'm like, you guys are on calls all day. And so to your point, like speed to lead you were just set up to fail in that regard. So then we started sending them to the SDRs, but then I realized it's so distracting. You got them working on outbounds, and every time they get into sort of a flow state, an inbound pops in and takes them sort of off course. And then then you're sort of maybe like, oh, we got a few inbounds today. I don't need to do so much on the outbound. I kind of, the goals and the targets are all out of whack. So we eventually separated it. And we had two people doing it, and they would just coordinate with one another because they knew speed to lead was everything. And I wanted some competition. So it was like between the two of you, you got to figure out how to get to these leads as fast as possible. And we played around with different comp structures. And eventually it was just like, I think we landed on this like first come, first serve concept, which was that way there was a competition of like who gets to it faster. But they also, what ended up happening is they made some negotiations amongst themselves. Like, I'm going to go to lunch during this hour, you cover it and you can get, and then you'll go. And so they ended up kind of figuring it out amongst themselves. And it turned out to be really successful that way. Cause yeah, speed is everything on those inbounds. It's almost more, I don't want to sound insulting to those who do it, but it's almost more of a customer service job in the sense that you just need to be there to respond quickly. But well, cool. Let's dive into what you're working on. SDRleader.com. You said you've got what is it? Almost 5,000
5,000 kind of verified full-time leaders. And so I do a lot of local events in all the different cities. And then my biggest part of my business is I do Pipeline Conference in November. We keep that only for full-time leaders. And it's the biggest, we'll have like 500 or 600 full-time SDR leaders there. We don't allow any ICs or anything. And
is this like at a hotel, like big, you're getting on stage type of environment? Yeah.
Yeah. So you do that. And and we work, kind of help SDR leaders learn from each other and then learn about what's different in the market. We do demo days with the new kind of entrants that are doing new things with AI, and SDR leaders learn from them. SDR leaders have become kind of much more important to the buying process than they were in the past. And they've taken a lot of leadership there. And so we do a lot of work in that as well.
I think it's the hardest job. I got a phone call about a week ago from, a guy who used to work with me leading sales development. And I kind of get these calls more often than probably any other call where, they're just under all this pressure and they're like, I feel like I'm set up to fail. And they don't have anyone to talk to, right? Like it's kind of like, unless you have maybe another SDR leader at your company, but you're competing to be better than them. And so you don't necessarily want to go to them with your vulnerabilities and stuff. So is this sort of kind of an open door for people to kind of safe space, so to speak, to kind of bounce off ideas or concerns and that type of stuff? Or is it more like you're just sitting in the audience listening to the presentations?
No, it's like when an SDR leader comes to my event, they know that everyone there is going to be an SDR leader. We don't make any exceptions. I tolerate all the awkwardness associated with that. So when they come, everyone there is an SDR leader, and they can learn from others. And then we'll even do sometimes, like last week we got a suite at Fenway just for people who are second to fifth line SDR leaders, because that's even more far removed. And so they can just kind of talk with each other. So the goal of SDRleader.com is to get full-time leaders together like them and just let them learn from each other. And that's our goal.
And so you're meeting up in different cities, basically? So people just got to kind of go to their local, whenever you're in town, or are people traveling all over to get to these?
I mean, they're local, but most of the time, we'll have at least someone that will travel 3 hours to come to them.
Yeah.
Or sometimes people will fly into a city just to come, because there aren't a lot of opportunities to do this. And it's the most effective way for them to improve their craft, is talk to other leaders who are in the same thing as them. And so we do it in every city, but people will travel for quite a ways to attend these kind of these local dinners and meetups.
Is it mostly all like tech, like SaaS, AI, tech? I used to just say SaaS, and now I feel like you got to say all these different things. But or do you have people coming from all walks of life, like car sales or whatever?
It's pretty much all SaaS, but I mean, the only rule is they need to be over an SDR team. It just happens to be SaaS that mostly does that. But I mean, we'll have everything from like Experian to, Meta to anyone who has an SDR team.
Oh, so you're getting big co's in there as well. So you got a full mix of sizes. Cool.
No, we had the head of Amazon's SDR team at our last week. So there's like just like a big mix. But I will say, like, it's primarily SaaS that happens to have SDR teams, so it ends up being that way, just kind of as a selection bias.
That makes sense. So I guess the answer of who should get involved is any SDR leader who kind of needs a sense of community. Is that right?
Yeah, any full-time SDR leader. Most are already a member of our community, but if you're not, definitely, if you get verified at SDRleader.com, then you get the secret invites to our secret meetings.
Is there a cost, or do they just have to get accepted in? I imagine there's got to be a cost.
No, there's no cost, but you have to be a full-time leader to be a part of them. And then but there's otherwise no cost to them.
Oh,
Unless
so
they want to go to, of course, they want to go to the conference and things.
okay, so the conference is where where they would pay to be a part of that, and then maybe you're making some sponsorship. I was going to say how you making money, but okay, so it's the conferences where they would pay, but to join SDRleader.com, no fee.
Yeah, join SDRleader.com, come to our virtual meetups, or come to our dinners, or our sporting events that we all meet up at. That's all open to you as long as you're a full-time leader.
Awesome. Well, hey, we made perfect timing right here. Everyone go follow Sam Nelson on LinkedIn. I believe you're also on X. Anything else you want to throw in there? Obviously, SDRleader.com. Go in there if you're leading an SDR team. Anything else you want to plug in there?
No, it was great. It was fun to chat with you, Collin.
Likewise.
And
I appreciate it. Yeah, we'll have to catch up again sometime. Thanks so much.
Right on.